For the past few months, we've been journeying through the early history of Israel's kingship, looking into the biblical stories of Samuel, Saul, and then David, and today, and later, Solomon. Looking into their little and big challenges as human beings along the way to this idea towards building a kingdom, restoring the kingdom at the promised land, and how God was present in those struggles. So David, once a shepherd, became the king. He established Jerusalem as the capital of this kingdom, new kingdom, and even named the city after him. And under this new ruler, Israel grew, from defeating Goliath to winning many battles. We love to hear this portion of the story where it seems like everything is going so well, everything is on the rise. The time when everything seems like going towards our favor. And then, here's the failure. Here's the fall from the rise. We remember when Samuel had to deal with the leaders of his community who came to him asking for a better leader than himself or his sons. We remember the fall of the first king, King Saul, who was the tall, good-looking guy they all looked up to, who was supposed to be the solution as a king. And then the same thing is happening to David here. From the portion we talked about last week, when David had an affair with Bathsheba, ends up killing her husband, Uriah. We remember the harsh words that the prophet Nathan confronts the king right after that. And he said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." There begins the series of these curses, if you may. The sword will never depart from your house. The child that was conceived in the affair with Bathsheba would die not long after. But it gets even uglier. David's oldest son, Amnon, raped his half-sister, Tamar. Tamar's full brother, who is also half-brother of Amnon, Absalom, was furious to hear this, went to their father, David, seeking justice. David was kind of passive in responding to this, and it was far from cooling down Absalom's anger, but fueling it. So Absalom ends up murdering Amnon, his half-brother, and goes into exile for 3 years. When Absalom came back from exile, he plots rebellion against his father David. Absalom was successful in forcing David to leave Jerusalem into the east side of River Jordan. And then the story we read today is the scene where David is commanding his army to a war against his son, who's in Jerusalem now, war against his own Jerusalem, his city, war against his Israel. Things were really turning ugly. It says that in the forest of Ephraim, Israel's troops were routed by David's army, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. That's what's written in verse 7 and 8. David wins the battle. And in this process, his son Absalom dies. And our portion ends with a deep sorrow. In the last verse we read, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, oh Absalom, my son, my son." And upon reflecting this story, I wondered, did David win or did he lose? Was the result a victory for David or a defeat? How about in our own lives? The many choices we make, small and big ones, either choosing a job, either deciding where to live, either determining the best method to parent your child. As we just take a moment and ponder our past and where we are right now, as individuals, as a nation, as one human race. Are we winning or are we losing? Or shall we criticize our culture instead for being overly focused on winning or losing? So I want to go back to our story about Absalom and revisit the odd scene of his death. And verse 9 from our reading says, "Now Absalom happened to meet David's army. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair, while the mule he was riding kept on going." Odd scene. But there are three factors worth noting about this scene. First thing that we want to pay attention to is that it happened by chance. It happened by chance. No one planned this way of killing Absalom, and no one could be blamed by this. And second thing is that it is very unclear. The Hebrew text that was written in original language is very unclear. And Walter Brueggemann, the theologian, argues that such obscurity may reflect the inability of the tradition to express what in fact happened, because it is so dark and ominous. At the painful moment of Absalom's failure, the tradition seems to mumble. And the third factor is this. This is the image that stuck to me throughout the week as I was reflecting on this passage. Absalom is hanging in midair. In some translation it says Absalom hangs between heaven and earth. Absalom is hanging between heaven and earth. Absalom is hanging between life and death, between the sentence of a rebel and the value of a son, between the greatness of a rising power and the yearning of the Father. He is no longer living, but he is not dead. And I felt that this scene makes us realize how much we spend our life right there hanging in the midair. A situation or a result we never intended. A moment that is unclear and full of question marks. Caught in the tree, exposed, vulnerable. Wonder why the Bible adds this somewhat poetic description of hanging between heaven and earth. Recently, I've been enjoying watching this TV show, and it's a Korean TV show on YouTube, where it's a dog show, and I like to watch dog shows. And this is a show where clients with pet dogs seek help and solution from professional trainers about the unhealthy behaviors of their dogs. And each episode will feature a dog with different behavioral symptoms. And some dogs bark at people, or some dogs will bite, some dogs will not eat, or some dogs will have a hard time potty training, and so on. And then the trainer comes in and observes the environment, how they're treated at home, or the space they have, and so on, to offer any kind of help. And no matter what the problem is, it funnels down to a pretty simple solution, and I found this very interesting. And it comes down to this: don't try to force the change, but try to create an environment where they can be themselves. An environment where they don't have to be nervous or afraid, but where they can feel and know that it's okay. Like we heard from Mary's prayer today, being broken. It's okay. That it's okay. Everything is okay, even if there are other dogs around you. Everything's going to be fine, even if someone rings a doorbell. Accepting the surrounding you are in as it is, and to be okay with it. And the most important aspect about this whole process is the patience of the owner. The effort by the owners to wait as long as it needs until their dog embraces and accepts that state of mind of peace. So it comes down to how much the owner wants to have a full control. No matter how good the intentions of the owners are, hugging them too much, feeding them too much, or trying to force them to feed because they're not eating, or cleaning them too much. It comes down to a discipline of letting it go. Letting it go. There's a quote by Father Richard Rohr who said, "The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is control." You must leave the garden where there are angels with flaming swords to keep you from ever really returning. You must leave the womb to be born. The opposite of faith is control. When we accept and realize that we are not in control, transformation happens. And this shows in the change of how David calls Absalom in verse 5 and verse 32, and compared to how he calls him in verse 33 at the very end. In verse 5, it says, "Be gentle with the young men, Absalom, for my sake." Be gentle with the young men, Absalom, for my sake. And when he encounters the brokenness of himself, of this whole situation, through the death of his son, Absalom is no longer the young man to him, but he cries, "Oh my son, oh my son." He cries 5 times in one verse. Perhaps we can find the good news from today's reading only when we step back and see this story and our life stories from a distance, and realize that all along God was, God is, and God will be the author of this universe. And the life of Christian is just that, a life that accepts the brokenness of our humanness. Like in Absalom's case, accepting the fact that we are caught in the tree, hanging between the heaven and earth. And like in David's case, accepting the deep human irony between the desire to win the battle versus to mourn for the cost he had to pay. For us, accepting whatever challenges we may be going through right now, admitting that it may not be about winning or losing, but it's about living. Not just thinking, not just knowing about it, but living the life where God is always in our lives. And I would like to end with the prayer of St. Patrick. Christ be with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us, Christ beneath us, Christ above us, Christ on our right, Christ on our left. Christ where we lie, Christ where we sit, Christ where we arise. Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of us, Christ in every eye that sees us, Christ in every ear that hears us. Salvation is of the Lord. Salvation is of the Christ. May your salvation, O Lord, be ever with us. Amen.